discuss movies. 3 every week. If you want to check out the actual show and subscribe to the podcast, please click on the link below. There's a link to our website there, podcastnametim.com. But today, we're talking Power Rangers. Again, this is Tales from a Space Dumpster. This is our YouTube exclusive series, and we're on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1, Episode 2, entitled High Five. And so we're going to get right into it. Basically, we're going to review the show, and then I'm going to also give a little ratings system that I've come up with to determine who is the greatest weekly villain that they've had to face. And so that'll be very exciting. But first and foremost, we start off where most episodes start off, in the juice bar, of course. While we're there at the youth center, Jason is climbing on a rope. He's going all the way to the top. We find out that Trini is afraid of heights. Of course, in come Bulk and Skull for some comedic relief to try and outdo Jason, and they provide their comedic relief in failing to climb the rope. After that, we discover Rita's plan for the week, and that is that she's going to trap them in a time warp, just like she did Zordon. So she has defeated Zordon in the past, and basically she's going to blow up the time zone and trap them there. So they'll be, I guess, I don't know how Zordon's gizmos and how he's able to be there, but she's going to turn them into other Zordons in some respects, so for what that's worth. Of course, Billy debuts this episode that he has made the infamous communicators, so the little sound that you're familiar with. They are malfunctioning a little bit, so it accidentally teleports them into the to the command center, and here we get a cringe-worthy moment for the series for sure, where Alpha 5 says, "What brings you to the hood?" He said that. Alpha 5 said that in the 90s. So we find out the villain for this week is going to be Bones. It's also going to be the Giant later on, but I'll get into more of their discussions later. But it's Bones and the Giant. Basically, there's a normal putty fight that goes on. They try and do the human fight first, and you can see here in this episode that they're still figuring out the mechanics as far as what they want the show to be. And so they don't really know what kind of action they want to bring us. There's a really weird sequence where they kind of form like a human chain to fight them, and that's just really weird. But they do that, and of course, basically while they're doing this fight, Billy is trapped by himself. He drops his morpher, and Trini has to overcome her fear of heights to save her friend. Good, except for the issue is that Power Rangers is at its best when the villain involved and the plot involved is what you're having to overcome. If it would have been a monster where height was involved or she had to overcome that to defeat the main monster, this would have been a good episode. It's very disjointed, and you can tell they're still figuring out the formula, because at this point we've already the human teenager part in the beginning. The lesson's already been learned for the day, and we haven't really seen anything from the villain. So a little weird there. Again, still figuring it out, but either way, they do end up having to fight Bones. He's at an amusement park, and we get the lowdown on what his superpowers are, which they're pretty numerous. Zordon says he can fire energy bolts from his eyes. He can jump really far. He can disappear. And he can also, of course, put himself back together again, and he has a sword. Bones is an excellent villain, at least in theory. So I guess I'll go ahead and get into my scoring system here. Basically, I base villains. It's a system I come up with recently where it's look, powers, plan, success, and voice. So do you look like an awesome villain? Do you have sweet powers? What's the plan that Rita comes up with, and are you the appropriate monster to do that plan? Were you successful in executing the plan? And then voice, because if you've watched Power Rangers, you know some of these villains can have really weird comical voices. And for Bones, I mean, he's got a lot of the things you want. He looks awesome. I mean, he's a skeleton with a sweet, like a musketeer hat and a cape and a sword. That's awesome. So that's a 5 out of 5 as far as look. Powers, again, fire from the eyes, although he doesn't do it, but he has his own minions, because they go into the time warp area, and you can see he has his own minions there, which is awesome. And Again, he can put himself back together again. So he has a lot of really cool powers. But he fails so hard. Like the plan, for example, to put them in a time warp. His power. He did his head floated around, and that sent them into the time warp. But really, it was the spaceship from earlier in the episode that flew by, and that's what created the time warp. So he didn't really create it himself. It was weird. He got like a lot of assistance, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Also, Squat and Babu are there to try and blow up the time warp area to close it off. So he doesn't do much. He kind of just shows up. They immediately go to the warp area, and then he's pretty much immediately defeated. And we don't even get to see him in giant form, which is a big knockdown for me as far as your success rate. So he needed too much help. He didn't really use any of his awesome powers at Sword Undescribed, and we don't get, the big version of him. So that's a 1 for success and voice. He's got that deep kind of weird like echo in his voice, just great. So overall, I have him at a score of 18 for Bones. But that's his. Again, they get out, and then we have like a third episode. So you have the first episode where Trini learns her basically how to overcome her fear. You have a weird second episode in some respects where they fight Bones, and then there's like a third episode at the end of this where they're fighting the giant who just shows up out of nowhere for no reason essentially, and there's no reason that couldn't have been Bones, but the giant shows up and he is terrible. He literally shows up out of nowhere. So let's go through the point system for him, I guess. Look, he looks like a generic knight person. It's just boring. So I gave him a 2. Powers. He doesn't have any. He has a sword, but we don't really see him do anything else. And he didn't have any of the other cool stuff. Plan. 1. Because he just showed up. There was no plan. All right, they defeated Bones. Throw the giant out there. So that's a 1. And then success, again, 1. He didn't do anything else for the whole episode. He just shows up at the end just to basically take the Megazord to the face. So a 1 for success. And voice, I gave him a 2. Why not? It wasn't cringeworthy. So a 7 for the giant. Not a great villain. Not a great episode. It's unfortunate because Bones is such a great idea of a villain. And I have nostalgic feelings for him in some respects because if you played the Super Nintendo Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game, you know that he was the first villain you faced in the show. And so it's really unfortunate that they just didn't capitalize. They didn't figure out the formula yet that you needed to have whatever your hero, whichever episode it's going to be for whichever Power Ranger, they need to overcome something. You need to have a villain specifically tailored and a plan specifically tailored to overcome that, and then they need to do cool stuff instead of this weird, like, disjointed episode. But that's pretty much the end. At the end, Zach scares Trini with a mask that kind of looks like one of Bones' minions, and she runs up the rope. But not much happened. The only thing that they kind of did with Trini is that she's the one that actually throws Bones' head through into the pit, and so I guess she kind of overcame her fear there because she's having to look down in this like pit that had been that came open, but not a great episode. It's early on in the series, so I think they'll figure it out. But that's pretty much it for this episode. Please subscribe, tell a friend, and look forward to seeing you next time on Tales from a Space Dumpster.